Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, merci to Catherine Furlong and to Louis Beaumier for the invitation to speak to you tonight. And congratulations to co-authors Martine Verdi and Pantino Sanchez on the launch of Maîtres, chez. I'm an artist and energy researcher from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm here to talk to you about how Churchill Falls continues to shape culture and energy futures here in Newfoundland and Labrador. This image is a photo collage by the artist Rhonda Pelly. It's from her political tarot project called Certain Strange Visions, very darkly humorous project. And the circle at the center of the palms is a photograph of what used to be a 75-meter fall of water at what became known as Churchill Falls. It was said you could hear the roar of that water for up to 16 kilometers away. Here's what Pelly says about the image. The ace of discs is the seed of material power. The seed is water. Water is life. The promise of the deal. Two businessmen trade this seed. I was thinking, she says, of the deal made between Newfoundland and Quebec, though it encompasses much more than that. Behind the shaking hands, she's put a pattern akin to a tablecloth. This business transaction, she says, this trading of land and environment is normalized in a domestic setting, never to be questioned, a domestic veneer masking extraction. And if you look closely at the design of the tablecloth in the circle, you can see the animated character of Ready Kilowatt, the character who represents electricity. This is an art installation that I made in 2008 when Newfoundland and Labrador became a have province for the first time since joining Canada in 1949. Have, according to the federal government's equalization formula. And I called this piece Mishta Shipu because it is about electricity. And Mishta Shipu is the Inuamuan word for the Churchill River. I wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous ownership of that resource. This piece is part of the provincial art collection. It's powered by hydroelectricity, and the neon blinks on and off to reflect the boom-bust nature of resource-based wealth. Sometimes you see the pink word have, and sometimes you see have not. It's a critique of extractive practices, how we relate to the resources of Labrador, and how we define wealth. I should say something here about my standpoint. I'm an artist. I'm also a PhD researcher, but I'm someone who grew up in a working class milieu. My father, uncle, and grandfather worked for a pulp and paper mill owned by Quebec's Abitibi. I worked as a CBC radio journalist for many years. I worked in Quebec City, in Labrador, as well as in Toronto and Newfoundland. Um, so I have lived and reported on political and cultural issues in Quebec and Labrador. Um, on a personal note, my husband's family is from Quebec City, and my children were educated in the French school system. So I like to think I understand some of the nuances in the Maîtres, chez book, and it's why I accepted the invitation to speak to you. I was intrigued to read it and to think about how Churchill Falls is impacting culture still to this day. I joked with Catherine when she invited me that Newfoundlanders are born with the shame of Churchill Falls. If not born with it, we certainly learn at an early age that the Churchill Falls deal is associated with failure. Our failure, in signing a lopsided and unjust deal, our subsequent failure over many decades to renegotiate it, our failure to include Indigenous peoples in the conversation. And despite Premier Smallwood's high hopes, that's Premier Smallwood depicted there, despite his high hopes, our failure to really truly benefit from joining Canada. This is a page from a Newfoundland and Labrador high school textbook. And the text refers to the $600 million estimated to have been lost annually by the Churchill Falls deal. lost to Newfoundland and Labrador's revenues until the 1998 revision of the contract, which allowed the province to net a $2.6 billion profit until the year 2041. The text also refers to the loss of sacred Indigenous burial sites and trapping and fishing places from the reservoir flooding created, which of course was done without any Indigenous cooperation. That vision of failure and loss flows from Churchill Falls to Muskrat Falls, which was called a boondoggle by one CEO. Louis is going to have fun translating boondoggle. Muskrat Falls cost estimates began at 7.4 billion and ballooned to almost double at 12.7 billion, which triggered a public inquiry here in this province. And amongst the findings of that inquiry, the LeBlanc inquiry, was that Newfoundland premiers, starting with Danny Williams, were dead set on Muskrat Falls, seeing it as a project to compete with Hydro-Quebec, to rectify the injustice of Churchill Falls, and that they leveraged those tensions between Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec to promote Muskrat Falls despite the rising costs and the poor justifications for the project. Citizens here in Newfoundland and Labrador, taxpayers like me, are now paying for the doubling of those costs on our monthly electricity bills. We have had some rate mitigation by the federal government, but we are a population of just 550,000 people. It will take us a long time to pay off Muskrat Falls. And in addition to the economic impacts, there are significant health and social impacts, particularly for the Indigenous peoples in Labrador. This is Our Mother, Our Earth, Our Mother, which was carved by Labrador Inuit artist Billy Gauthier. This is carved from a fin whale skull, the second largest mammal on Earth, and this carving weighs over 600 pounds. Here's some of what Gauthier said about the sculpture. She represents my ancestors. They were at peace because they listened to our ultimate mother. From the moment their feet touched her frozen lands and waters, our Inuit lands, our Inuit Nunangat. When our expansive mother spoke sternly, they quickly changed their ways to please her. The earth provided our ancestors with a Bible through her voice, and our culture was born through listening and obeying. Billy Gauthier is not only a fine artist, he's also an activist. He and two others held a 13-day hunger strike to protest the lack of Indigenous consultation around Muskrat Falls. So we learned nothing from Churchill Falls and repeated the same injustices with Muskrat Falls. They ended their hunger strike only when the province promised to put an expert panel in place to oversee the removal of trees and vegetation before flooding the Muskrat Falls Reservoir. And yet, despite that promise, and despite the recommendations of an expert panel, trees and vegetation were not removed. And a year later, on a provincial holiday when perhaps people weren't paying as much attention, the reservoir was flooded. And methylmercury pollution is now flowing downstream. This is a piece by Inuit artist Heather Campbell. It's called Methylmercury. It depicts Inuit sea goddess Iniayuk, half woman, half beluga. Methylmercury is a neurotoxin, and it is now polluting Indigenous food webs downstream from Muskrat Falls, where Inuit and Innu people hunt and fish. Campbell says the poison is grasping the figure's neck and represents another form of violence against Indigenous women. If you're interested in Muskrat Falls, here's some additional resources. This book, How a Mega Dam Became a Predatory Formation, edited by anthropologist Stephen Crocker and writer Lisa Moore, is about the lead up to and the aftermath of Muskrat Falls from many different points of view. It's an excellent resource. And Ozzie Michelin is a Labrador journalist, writer, documentarian, and he is the son of a trapper. He's researching his master's currently in Montreal, and he's doing a mapping, cultural mapping of memory, attaching it to the landscape of Labrador. So both of these things are really good additional resources. One of the only practical justifications for Muskrat Falls was that with this additional hydro energy, Newfoundland and Labrador could stop using the Holyrood thermal plant, which burns highly polluting bunker C oil. This plant is the province's second biggest industrial polluter, producing 600,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. That promise was also broken. NL Hydro considers the Labrador Island Link, that's the power line that carries Muskrat Falls power to the island, they consider it unreliable. And they recently applied for over $1 billion in public money to extend the life of the Holyrood plant. So Muskrat Falls has failed on many energy justice levels. It has failed at unraveling NL's energy future from fossil fuels and their GHG emissions. And on that, these black dots, these are all NL Hydro electricity plants that run on diesel. 16 of these are along the coast there in Labrador, as you can see. These are Indigenous communities largely, and despite their relative proximity to Muskrat Falls and Churchill Falls, these communities are running on diesel, and this diesel is shipped in, adding to the emissions. Nain is the one ray of hope here. That's the second most northern dot. You can see it's yellow. We're doing some work on this project, some research. The Inuit government of Nunatsiavut is developing a solar microgrid project in Nain, which could serve as a blueprint to get the other 22 diesel-powered communities in Newfoundland and Labrador off diesel. This is Rhonda Pelly again, and she says the Eight of Cups reflects on how Muskrat Falls has transformed the land, poisoned the water. The transmission towers are stripped of purpose, transmitting nothing to nowhere, while the bodies of the women are the flowing currents of life itself. They march out with 8 golden buckets, carrying what life remains. This is a reference to outmigration. And I should explain that there are 2 major cultural events that really mark Newfoundland and Labrador culture and are at the root of many political decisions. The failure of Churchill Falls is the first. Then the second is the loss of 10% of our population after the 1992 cod moratorium. These 2 potent cultural events continue to influence political decision making, especially around energy, and contribute to an unhealthy obsession with extractive mega projects with little regard to the environmental or financial costs, to the well-being of citizens, and to Indigenous sovereignty. I'm currently comparing political rhetoric around Beta Nord in Newfoundland and Norway. Norway, because Beta Nord is an Equinor oil project. This project has gone through many decision gates and it looks likely to proceed. And this despite the 2021 International Energy Agency statement that to achieve zero emissions by 2050, there can be no further investment in new fossil fuel supply projects. And despite the image here, Beta Nord is not just one oil well, but 40 to 60 wells in an area on the edge of the ecologically sensitive and UN protected Grand Banks. There's an estimated 1 billion barrels of oil, and this is going to be expensive oil to get. It is 500 kilometers east of Newfoundland, as you can see on the map there. The drilling will happen up to 1,200 meters down. It has been added to the carbonbombs.org website for the GHG emissions that it will add to the overheating atmosphere. There'll be some employment, but less than 800 jobs for the life of the project. And Newfoundland and Labrador will take around 15% of the projected profits. And when you compare this to Norway, where other Equinor projects, 75% of the profits go back to the Norwegian government. So Newfoundland is committing its economy and society to 30 more years of fossil fuels. And oil is much more than just an export commodity here in Newfoundland and Labrador. It has been rhetorically positioned as central to our economic and cultural survival, coming online as it did in 1997. That's when the oil industry started here, just 5 years after the massive social and economic dislocation of the cod moratorium. And this reinforces a widely accepted notion that the oil sector is the fulcrum of Newfoundland and Labrador's social stability and central to its political planning. Quebec is showing real energy leadership as the co-chair of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. But I wonder if we will ever see Newfoundland and Labrador on this grid. We'll never know, of course, but I can't help but wonder, since reading Maîtres, chez, if Newfoundland and Labrador would be pursuing Beta Nord, if the Churchill Falls deal had been more just, if Newfoundland had benefited equally. Some sources say Newfoundland and Labrador lost $25 billion in revenue in the Churchill Falls deal, which would more than cover our current provincial debt of $19.4 billion. And it's not just, what money has been lost. Despite Newfoundland and Labrador's resource wealth of hydro power and oil and gas, we have Canada's highest rate at 30% of households, 1/3. We have the highest rate of energy poverty, and you compare that to 10% in Quebec. This uneven distribution of abundance and scarcity across global and regional scales is an example of what Smill considers a symptom of energy accumulations versus energy transitions. We could be in a place of pursuing energy for energy's sake here. But of course, the energy landscape is changing now with batteries and solar and wind. This is a slide that I created after reading a Stantec report called the Atlantic Canada Offshore Wind Integration and Transmission Study. It was commissioned by the federal government and by the Atlantic provincial governments and the Net Zero Alliance. And it's about offshore wind capacity in Atlantic Canada. And so you see the different provinces and their capacities represented there in the gigawatts. The capacity is 3 times the power of Churchill Falls. Hydro-Quebec has recognized this with its recent request for further information from energy developers to help it determine timelines and costs to build transmission lines and other technologies to potentially connect with Nova Scotia and their offshore wind sector. This move has caused some consternation here in Newfoundland and Labrador amongst those people watching closely the renegotiation of the Churchill Falls deal. And of course, we're at this time of climate and security inflection and change. This is a grid. The blue veins on the image are the existing electricity transmission lines. Of course, most of them are running north to the US. The Share report that I've referenced there in the image says that Canada could be in line to lose up to $220 billion in new investment and up to 80,000 direct jobs if it fails to deliver a clean power grid running east to west at the scale and speed that industry and investors need. And yet, Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec have declined to join this national strategy to work together with other provinces on a new transmission infrastructure. Why? why are they declining to participate? One has to wonder if both provinces are continuing to hold on to past grievances and standing apart from this reimagination of Canada's grid. And I'm going to leave you with this image of an art piece by Patrick Tomlinson to underline, it's a water clock. And it's to underline how time is speeding up in the energy transition, and Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador may be left behind. Patrick Tomlinson spent 2 weeks walking through Labrador along the power lines radiating from Churchill Falls towards Quebec. This installation that he created combines photographs and this water clock, and the jars are filled with water from the Churchill River after it courses through the turbines at the Churchill Falls power plant. On the left are the jars representing the years elapsed since Newfoundland and Labrador signed the deal with Quebec. On the right are the number of jars representing the number of years remaining until the deal is up. It's a fragile imbalance, but it's the same water on both sides. Thank you. Merci for the invitation to talk and to share my ideas with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at my website. And again, congratulations on the publication of your book. And thanks so much for asking me to participate. Bonsoir.